We are live on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and on YouTube. I'm Rabbi Chernitsky, Director of Chabad of Newfoundland. Happy Hanukkah, everybody. We're going to do a Hanukkah class, text-based, the same class, similar to the class we had 2 weeks ago, I believe. We are doing a screen sharing on the Facebook, so you could see the text. How can I do that here? How can I do that here? No. Share screen. Okay, so we're gonna stick to this for now. I'm gonna be reading the text. So again, we'll start right away with the Hanukkah class. I am looking at the first page of these booklets, and the title of the class is Miketz, which is the Torah portion, the Parsha of the week. But we're gonna be focusing on Hanukkah, not the Torah portion. Why the conflict? Why the conflict between the Greeks and the Jews? Both cultures have tremendous wisdom. We both thrive in intellectual pursuits. So why the conflict between the two in the 2nd century BCE? So we'll start with the text from from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. It says like this: Hanukkah is the holiday of light. What is Hanukkah? The Talmud asks. In other words, what is the primary miracle which Hanukkah commemorates? The Talmud answers that Hanukkah was established to commemorate the miracle of the oil. They found 1 jug of oil with the seal of the high priest, and had only enough oil to last 1 day, but miraculously it lasted 8 days. Inasmuch as the holiday commemorates the miracle of the oil, the lesson which we learn from the holiday should be derived from the Hanukkah lights as well. What is a candle? Light, the function of the candle, doesn't create anything new. It merely illuminates and enlightens that which already exists, and gives us the ability to see and determine whether the matters in our close proximity are dangerous or whether they're desirable. Is the gaping hole a door which leads to the expanses of the world, or a pit which brings one to the world's lowest depths? Is it white or black? And so on and so forth. Then another piece, light represents wisdom. Let's see if I can make it bigger. Here we go. How does this relate to the war of the Greeks against the Jews? On a deeper level, light represents wisdom because it enlightens the person. As the verse says, the fool goes in the dark while the wise man's eyes are in his head, i.e., he has the ability to see clearly and properly evaluate what he should avoid and what he should embrace. So, where's the clash? That's what we're going to get to now. Okay? Section B, the great distinction. Again, continuing with the Lubavitcher Rebbe's talk. Now, the Greeks were a very intellectually advanced nation. They are well known in history, as mentioned in the works of Hasidism as well, to have been heavily engaged in the pursuit of wisdom. The Jews were also a very intellectually minded nation, constantly in the pursuit of wisdom, as the verse says, for this is your wisdom and understanding, the aids of the nations. So that being the case, that both nations, the Jews and the Greeks, highly treasured the pursuit of wisdom, why did they clash to the extent that they waged a full-out war? Now, the crux of the matter is that it's a very big difference between excuse me, it's a very big difference between just wisdom and Torah. Yeah, the Torah is not just a book of wisdom, but within it there are ethics and morals that are intertwined in the Torah. It's not just wisdom for its own sake, wisdom aloof, removed from morality and ethics, as we're going to see here. The Medrash makes the following statement: if someone tells you that there is wisdom among the nations, believe him. If he says there is Torah among the nations, don't believe him. As explained in Hasidic thought, Hasidism, a name is very significant. A lot can be learned from the distinction of the names. Wisdom, Chochmah in the original, versus Torah. Wisdom refers purely to intellectual pursuit. Wisdom is the ability to evaluate any given matter, but it does not compel the individual to implement the results. You may know that something is good and desirable, or that something is evil and detestable, but it has nothing to do with your choices. You can choose not to act according to your intellectual conclusions. Torah means guide. It not only illuminates and enlightens your life, giving you the ability to discern right from wrong, it also influences your life choices, causing you to conduct yourself according to your intellectual conclusions. These two possibilities exist within the realm of Torah itself. One could study it simply for intellectual pleasure, or one could study it because it is God's wisdom, and in that case, the Torah will become a portion of life, Sam HaChaim in the original, and it will influence his behavior to conform with the Torah and its mitzvah, the commandments. If one approaches Torah as a mere intellectual pursuit, it becomes the opposite of a portion of life. Our sages said that when one fails to recite the blessing of a Torah study, blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, the giver of the Torah, i.e., when we forget about the giver of the Torah, it brings destruction to the world in a most literal sense and leads the Jewish people into a materialistic exile. As we're going to see soon, the meaning of this obscure statement that at a certain point in time, the Jews were making a blessing on the study of Torah, which we're supposed to say every day at the beginning of the day before we say any verses or study Mishnah, Talmud, etc. We're going to say that this means that they forgot about the deeper dimension of the Torah. The Torah isn't just wisdom, but it's godly wisdom. You cannot separate one from the other. Otherwise, the results are disastrous. So we're going to see now that, excuse me, we're going to see that now more in depth. Just taking a drink of water. Okay. So you have source number 1 from Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah 9:11, chapter 9, verse 11. Who is the man so wise to understand this? And who is he to whom the mouth of the Lord has spoken that he may declare it? Why is the land ruined and withered like a wilderness without anyone passing through? And the Lord said, it is because they have forsaken my Torah, which I set before them, and have not hearkened to my voice, nor walked by it. So the Talmud explains this obscure verse in Jeremiah. Verse number 2. Rabbi Huda said in the name of Rab, what is the meaning of the verse? This is from the Talmud. What's the meaning of the verse? Who is the man who's so wise to understand this? Why is the land ruined and not withered like a wilderness without anyone passing through? So this question was asked to the sages and not the prophets, but they could not explain it. The matter remained a mystery until God himself explained it. Right? And this is the in other words, the in the book of Jeremiah itself, you have the answer. Right? In that next verse. The Lord said, it is because they have forsaken my Torah, which I said before them, and have not hearkened to my voice, nor walked by it. So it would appear that have not hearkened to my voice is the same as nor walked by it. Seems redundant. So we say, no. Rabbi Huda said, the Rab said, the expression nor walked by it means that they did not first recite a blessing over the Torah. They didn't make a blessing. So to understand more what that means, we look at source number 3. This from the Bach, the Hebrew acronym for his pseudonym, Beit Chadash in Hebrew, literally new house. He's one of the main commentaries printed on the sites of the Tur. The Tur was the son of the famous rabbi, the Rosh, who was Ashkenazi and became the chief rabbi of Spain, who was, of course, Sephardi. And his son, the Tur, known as the Tur for his magnum opus, he codified Jewish law into a series of books called the Tur, and one of the main commentators in the Tur is the Beit Chadash or Beis Chadash, known just for the Hebrew acronym Bach. His name was Rabbi Yoel Sirkish. He lived from 1561 through 1640, and he was a preeminent rabbi and philanthropist in Poland, and he supported his own yeshiva, house of study, and also supported many Torah scholars. So let's read inside source number 3. This is very perplexing. Why were they meted such severe punishment for the seemingly minor transgression of failing to recite the blessing for Torah study. It seems that the real point is that we should be studying Torah to unite our souls with the spirituality and the holiness of Torah's source. God gave us the Torah as an eternal gift so that our souls and our bodies, our 248 limbs and 365 sinews, as they're broken down according to the Talmud, should cleave to the 248 mitzvot, the positive commandments, and the 365 prohibitions, the negative commandments. But at that point, they transgressed this rule. They studied Torah for their own mundane pleasures, to understand the laws for the sake of their business practices, or to demonstrate their brilliance. They didn't intend to cleave to the Torah's holiness and spirituality and to bring the divine presence into this world. That's the end of source number 3. Pretty straightforward. As we mentioned before, Torah isn't just a collection of wisdom, but rather Torah is godly wisdom, and when you study it, it's not just studying for the sake of knowing just the way a person would study math, English, etc. But when you study the Torah, part of the purpose of studying Torah is to connect with Almighty God who gave the Torah. Now we have source number 4. It says wisdom among the nations, the title. This is from the Rambam Maimonides. The rationales for all these calculations and the reasons why these numbers are added, why subtractions are made, how all these concepts are known, and the proofs for each of these principles are the subject of the wisdom of astronomy and geometry, concerning which the Greeks wrote many books, and these are presently in the hands of the sages. But the texts written by the sages of Israel in the age of the prophets from the tribe of Issachar have not been transmitted to us. Nevertheless, since these concepts mentioned earlier can be proven in an unshakable manner, leaving no room for question, the identity of the author, be he a prophet or a Gentile, is of no concern. For a matter whose rationale has been revealed and has been proven truthful in an unshakable manner, we do not rely on the personal authority of the individual who made these statements or taught these concepts, but on the proofs he presented and the reasons he made known. We're not speaking about theology. We're speaking about calculations related to astronomy. So the source is relevant. When it comes to theology, of course, we're very careful which sources we study, we learn from. But when it comes to something like this, just the numbers, we are not concerned. Now, going back to the talk of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Torah of Truth states that there is wisdom among the nations to the extent that those wisdoms are to be consulted in certain matters, such as medical advice, as we saw before, astronomy. The Torah recognizes the expertise of a non-Jewish physician. The Torah also recognizes the field of astronomy. Maimonides writes that some of the calculations for the Jewish calendar were taken from non-Jewish sources, although he seems to indicate that the wisdom of the Gentiles itself has a source in Torah. And now we come to, sort to speak, the punchline. Again, the difference between the wisdom of Torah and the wisdom of the Greeks. The lesson from Aristotle. Nonetheless, their knowledge and wisdom have no impact on their behavior. This is the punchline. Despite the recognition of right and wrong, they retain the ability to behave in the opposite manner. Being that their wisdom was not linked to their behavior, there's even the possibility of being smart to do evil. I.e., even as the Torah recognizes that they are wise, they utilize their wisdom to commit evil. God forbid. A lack of wisdom is not a positive thing, but what is even worse to use one's intellect to commit evil. There's a well-known story about Aristotle, one of the greatest Greek philosophers, who is often dubbed Chacham, a wise man in Jewish sources, and Maimonides, the Rambam, extols his wisdom on several occasions. He was once caught in an immoral act, and when he asked, how could such a wise man, teacher to so many students, do such a loathsome act? So he responded, no, I'm not Aristotle, right? So when he's in the act of pursuing wisdom, when he's teaching, when he's studying, he's Aristotle. But when it came to his behavior, he was no longer Aristotle because his wisdom was not associated with his behavior to begin with. So we're going to see by Socrates too. Similarly, another of the famous Greek philosophers named Socrates, who is quoted by the Chavis Yair, one of the great rabbis from the 18th century, I believe, as having said, but love truth above all. He's known to have lived in a wild manner, especially with regard to his immoral marital life, and it was a regular component of his behavior, unlike Aristotle, who was merely caught once. They didn't even bother asking Socrates about such matters, because they knew who he was, because his wisdom made no impact on his behavior. However, among the Jewish people, there is a Torah, a guide. The pursuit of intellect which illuminates the paths of right and wrong obligate him to behave accordingly. Yeah? Everybody makes mistakes. Nobody's perfect, but no Jewish person will tell you that right now I don't have to keep the Torah. That right now the Torah doesn't expect me to behave this way. Absolutely not. If I made a mistake, then I would think it's the Torah, no question about it. Let's look at source number 5. We're coming close to the end. This is from the Talmud. Rabbi Yochanan said as follows: what is the meaning of that which is written? For the priest's lips should keep knowledge, and they should seek Torah at his mouth. For he is a messenger, Malach in the original, of the Lord of hosts. Because Malach, this is important. Malach could be translated as messenger, could be translated as an angel. So the verse teaches, if the teacher is similar to an angel, Malach of the Lord, then seek Torah from his mouth. But if not, do not seek Torah from his mouth. So, what do we have so far? That the Torah obligates a person to behave in a moral and ethical way. You cannot say right now, this is my persona that's not connected to the Torah, no such thing, the way we saw by Aristotle. But further, a teacher also has to be a proper person. We don't just say the Torah is special in its own right. It doesn't matter where you get it from. Say no, right? If it's not acting like an angel, quote unquote, then you need to find a new teacher. Now we're going to finish with the talk of the Rebbe. What is primary and what is secondary? Why the distinction? If both the Greeks and the Jewish people value the pursuit of intellect, then why are they different from each other? The difference is in their approach to wisdom. In the Jewish approach, action is the primary goal, right? The first and foremost priority is to behave according to the dictates of Torah and mitzvahs, the commandments, and that is why we study, to know which deeds to embrace and which to avoid. The pursuit of knowledge is only a means to an end, to be practically applied to our lives. It is therefore impossible for a Jew to use this wisdom to commit evil, because the first foundation is that one must behave according to Torah's dictates. And the entire existence of intellect is only here to serve the purpose of differentiating between good and bad. Such wisdom cannot be perverted into an evil one, being that the entire goal of the wisdom is solely to influence his behavior for the better. The whole goal of Torah to begin with is to act in a proper way. Why do you study? To know what does God want from you right now. This isn't true of Greek wisdom. There, the first foundation is the value of the intellect alone. They worship the wisdom. Therefore, when it comes to one's personal behavior, a person could remain selfish and untamed, blinded by his lusts, and fully engaged in the pursuit of pleasure, and not see the contradiction. Even if such a person desires to follow the dictates of his intellect, his desires can overpower him. They aren't impressed by intellectual arguments and can even twist those arguments to serve the opposite purpose. People ask, why do we need Judaism? Why do we need the Ten Commandments if we have civil law? Anyways, you can't kill someone else. Anyways, you can't steal. So why do you need the Torah? Why do you need the commandments? The Torah starts when the civil law ends, right? We know not to kill doesn't just mean not to, God forbid, take somebody's life. But as we saw actually in last week's Torah portion, the story with Yehuda and Tamar, Judah and Tamar, that she refused to accuse Yehuda, Judah, of being the father of their quote-unquote illicit children. Why? Because she's teaching us a lesson that it's better to be thrown into a fiery furnace, as what they were going to do to Tamar, instead of embarrassing somebody in public. Right? So the Torah only begins when the most basic morality and ethics end. And why is that? Because intellect isn't the final goal. The goal is to connect to the Almighty God through studying the Torah, not that the intellect is at the top. Okay, let's continue. Why they have many gods? Continues the Lubavitcher Rebbe. This approach stems from another issue. Jewish approach, the most important element is the resulting action, doesn't stem from an intellectual conviction. It stems from a dedication to God, whom we recognize to transcend all other existences, as is commonly called in Yiddish, the Eibishter, the one above. He transcends anything and everything. And if we are to declare intellect as the greatest of all creations, God would remain higher than it. The entire world, God is higher than it. The entire universe and everything it contains, God is still higher. With that in mind, behavior is a priority and foundation in our approach simply because God determined it to be so. With that foundation, we can proceed to pursue knowledge and determine right from wrong, and so on and so forth. This foundation should influence all study, secular pursuits as well, to follow the same path. Yeah, this is very clear. This wasn't the case among the nations. They too had a concept of godliness, but that was not the first and foremost foundation. It was a result and outgrowth of their own desires. There were therefore many gods among them, being that there are many wants and desires, the deities were many and varied as well. This is also why their gods are involved in theft, promiscuity, and crime, as told over in their religious mythologies, which the Jews forbid to study. Their gods are outgrowths of their own desires, and they therefore resemble those desires perfectly. And here we have the end of the lesson. That was the war between the Greeks and the Jews. The Greeks definitely valued intellect, but it was in a direct contradiction to the Jewish approach to wisdom. The Greeks valued wisdom as an end in itself, one which wasn't specifically associated with a specific mode of behavior. On a practical level, a person was free to behave as he saw fit without taking others into consideration. If another person disturbed him, there was nothing stopping him from freeing himself of the nuisance, even if he needed to resort to murder, God forbid. That was the basis of the ideological war and the very physical war of the Greeks against the Jews. And that is the miracle of Hanukkah. So the Hasmoneans, overcame the Greeks, were victorious, and found one jug of oil with the seal of the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, with which to light the menorah. This wasn't just any oil, a wisdom which isn't necessarily associated with human behavior, but an oil with the seal of the high priest, which symbolizes the pursuit of wisdom which is sanctified with the goal of bettering human behavior. This is the meaning of the Torah. It doesn't only light up the room to show us what is a door and what is a pit, it influences us to behave according to our intellect and to transform the obstacle into something productive. I hope you enjoyed it. The plans to God willing continue next week with another class which will be on the Parsha, the Torah portion of the week. If you enjoyed it, drop us a comment. If you have any questions, you could leave a comment or send me an email, rabbiNewfoundland@gmail.com. Again, I'm Rabbi Chernitsky, Director of Chabad of Newfoundland. It's been a pleasure. Happy Hanukkah.